Oil prices are dropping, but gas prices aren't coming down in the usual proportion. The Biden administration and Democrats say they want producers to produce more. NTD's Melina Wisecup has more.
The price of oil is hovering around $100 per barrel. That's lower than a week ago. But the price at the pump is only trickling down by the penny. President Biden and Democrats have referred to the price increase as the Putin price hike, although prices were rising before the war broke out. Now Democrats are unifying under another message. Oil producers are the problem.
There is concern about whether there is profiteering happening at the gas station level as well as at the oil company level.
And on Capitol Hill, Democrats are following the administration's footsteps, now preparing to put oil producers under the microscope.
Over the past few days, the price of crude has actually gone down, but the average price of a gallon is still stuck at nearly $4.30. If anyone thinks this is fair, efficient, or sensible, they're probably an oil executive.
Oil producers say there's a lag for gasoline prices to follow the drop of crude oil prices. Congress is calling on CEOs from oil and gas companies to answer questions in a hearing. In the meantime, the Biden administration is asking companies to produce more, while assuring Americans that Biden's green energy policy is still being worked on in the background.
I think Americans should see the administration calling right now for an increase in supply as something that helps them. And that's what it's increased supply at home and increased supply around the world so that we can reduce the costs at the pump. But ultimately, the administration's goal is not to have us be so reliant on volatile sources of energy like fossil fuels.
House Speaker Nancy Pelosi today hinted that Congress could take action to cancel oil companies' federal leases unless they're actively drilling.
If they want to drill, they have places to drill. Use it or lose it. Let somebody else drill there.
Melina, President Biden is now publicly targeting some of these oil companies and accusing them of taking advantage of the situation. So, Melina, how is Congress reacting to this?
So it seems like congressional leadership is taking the same approach as the Biden administration, echoing the Biden administration, their approach to these higher gas prices. So we heard from Senate Leader Schumer this week saying that he wants to call the CEOs of those oil producing companies to come to the Senate and testify, and so that the senators can press those CEOs on whether they're passing on the lower oil prices to the consumers. And we heard that again from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi today. So it seems like the congressional leadership here is really trying to shift the focus away from the Biden administration's energy policies and trying to put more pressure on those oil producers. Now, another idea being floated here in Congress is to implement something called a use it or lose it when it comes to the oil producers' leases. So they want to pass something that would force those oil producers to use those leases or have them revoked. And this is a method to kind of encourage those CEOs of the oil producers to produce more oil or face having their leases revoked. Now, this is to try to get them to produce more oil so that the gas prices will hopefully be lowered. So that's another solution that House Democrats are looking at. But ultimately, I think what we're seeing is congressional leadership in the Biden administration trying to shift Americans' focus away from the energy policies and more focus on how CEOs of those oil producing companies play a role in these higher prices. Steve, back to you.
Thanks for that, Melina. And the House passed a bill Thursday to end normal trade relations with Russia and Belarus. Lawmakers voted 424 to 8 in favor of legislation to raise tariffs on goods from the two countries.
The legislation the House will pass today represents an intense action to further isolate Russia and decimate its economy.
Said another way, American dollars will no longer fund Russia's war machine.
The House vote came one day after Ukrainian President Zelensky pleaded with Congress and U.S. allies to do more to deter Russia.
It's not a temporary thing. They cannot just go kill a bunch of people, destroy cities, kill women and children, and then go back and have business as usual.
We must do everything in our power to hold Russia accountable for the atrocities it is committing hourly in the nation of Ukraine.
The broad action would revoke most favored nation status for Russia and is being taken in coordination with the European Union and Group of 7 countries. The Senate is expected to take up the measure soon for final passage.
When the House passes this bill, I expect it'll have broad bipartisan support here in the Senate, and I will work with my colleagues to find a way to move it through this chamber quickly.
The bill gives President Biden power to impose even stricter import taxes on their exports amid the ongoing invasion of Ukraine. With Ukrainian President Zelensky making his emotional plea to Congress, some Democrats and Republicans are calling for more support for Ukraine, both humanitarian and militarily. Here to discuss this ongoing crisis, we have Tennessee Congresswoman Diana Harshbarger. Congresswoman Diana Harshbarger, thank you so much for joining us on the Capitol Report.
Yes, thanks. My pleasure, Steve.
Now, Congresswoman, it appears that there's a lot of bipartisan support to offer Ukraine some serious weaponry, to potentially offer a no-fly zone as well. I just want to get your thoughts on this issue.
They have asked us for more weaponry, give them the Stingers, give them the Javelins, give them ammunition to fight the war. Humanitarian aid is huge. They are begging for things like milk and formula and diapers. I watched a video the other day, and they're talking about last week, and they only had 2 weeks supply of things like dialysis for children or chemotherapy for those children that had cancer. Give them what they need to help those people that are still there and trapped survive. I'm all about doing that, and the humanitarian aid, in my opinion, is critical, but give them the weapons they asked for. As far as a no-fly zone, the Biden administration doesn't look like they're going to do that, and it's a complicated issue, but supply them with what they need to fight this war, because Russia invaded Ukraine. It wasn't the other way around, and they're standing for democracy, and they've chosen freedom over tyranny, and let's help them in any way we can to survive and beat the Russians back.
Congresswoman, we all very much care about what's happening in Ukraine, especially on a humanitarian level to the people of Ukraine. But there are many issues also raging back here at home. For instance, we have the border crisis, we have gas prices skyrocketing, the pandemic looks like it's starting to kick back up again worldwide. And with that in mind, there have been concerns over China controlling the supply of PPE and certain medications and various medical supplies. Do you think we're prepared for another round of the virus if it were to spread on a large scale?
Well, I've said it for 25 years, Steve, coming to Congress on my own and talking about the medication supply issue. And, if the pandemic didn't do anything, it uncovered the necessity to be self-reliant in these things like the PPE that we're so reliant to China, who is an adversarial nation, by the way. We're relying on them for 90% of our medications are active pharmaceutical ingredients in our finished product. We need to institute bringing those things back and incentivizing these companies to make it in America or use our allies. And yes, I think, I don't know how secure. I've asked these questions. Where are we at on the scale if the pandemic arises, or another one, for God's sakes? Are we going to be self-sufficient? Do we have what we need to fight that? And, I'm ringing that bell, and I'm doing all I can, Steve, to make the administration aware of, these particular issues.
Speaking of PPE, when it comes to the mask mandates on airplanes, there's been a strong call by Republican senators and members of Congress, and even quite a few Democrats, to repeal the mandates on airplanes. Yet the CDC is still guiding the federal government to keep them in place. Have they given any indication as to what their threshold is to drop these mandates, or is it just kind of arbitrary?
We asked her today, and we didn't get a good response at all. But when the Senate passed that, and there's no more secure place than an airplane. Honestly, with the HEPA filtration system they have, there's no reason we should be wearing masks. And I've said this to you before. It's not about COVID. It's about control. And if they can continue to push that narrative and tell us what we should and shouldn't do, they're going to continue to do that. But if they get enough pressure. Why did they drop the mask mandate right before the State of the Union speech? That was another question we asked. How funny is that? And why are our children still having to be masked when the rate of contracting COVID is so much less than these children that it would be in an immunocompromised person? not a lick of sense. It doesn't make a bit of sense as to why they do that. But even some of the airline CEOs, I think it was American and maybe Southwest, I don't remember, they have advocated to stop this on the airplanes, in the airport. So we'll see. Now that the Senate stepped up, we'll see where this goes.
Congresswoman Diana Harshbarger, thank you.
Thank you, Steve. My pleasure.
4 GOP senators introduced a bill banning Russian uranium imports. North Dakota Senator Kevin Cramer said that banning uranium is another way to defund Putin's aggression in Ukraine. He added that America should be reestablishing its uranium capacity instead of allowing Russia to profit. President Biden has not included uranium in his ban of Russian imports thus far. Leading bill sponsor Senator John Barrasso advocates for full support of Ukraine. He criticized President Biden on Fox News Wednesday for not doing enough. And Senator Lindsey Graham, with support of 9 other GOP senators, introduced a non-binding resolution Wednesday urging President Biden to help get fighter jets and an air defense system into Ukraine.
So the bottom line is, while NATO no-fly zone seems to be a bridge too far for me and the administration, there is bipartisan support for sending a package that includes fighter jets and air defense systems to the Ukraine immediately so that we can have a Ukrainian no-fly zone.
Poland had previously offered to transfer their MiG fighter planes to a U.S. base in Germany in order for the U.S. to send them to Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken greenlighted the idea in an interview. However, that proposal was later rejected by President Biden. The family of a January 6th defendant is speaking out. This as Democrats and Republicans clash over legislation to expand efforts to counter domestic terrorism. NTD's Iris Dow has more.
The heavy rain did not stop the ends of Matthew Perna from speaking out right outside the Capitol.
Right now, our country is focused on the Ukraine and Russia, while our very own Americans are rotting away in jail for exercising their freedom of speech.
They're calling attention to the situation facing January 6 defendants, many of whom, like their nephew, face time in prison. They also cited a lack of due process and tremendous pressure from the outside world.
My brother has received hateful letters in the mail and online telling him that Matthew deserved what he got. Social media continues to fuel this flame as well.
Perna, 37, took his own life in February, 2 months before he was to be sentenced. His family says he was worn down after a year of dealing with 4 criminal charges lodged against him for what they say was a 20-minute walk through the Capitol on January 6. Several Republican lawmakers stood alongside the family today.
And that there are very few Republicans, very few members of Congress that are willing to speak out and stand up for these people's due process rights. Do they even believe in America and a fair justice system?
Meanwhile, some Democrats are renewing their push for legislation titled Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. They said at a hearing yesterday that it's a top priority for the country, citing January 6.
It is clear that the mob that attacked us that terrible day included significant representation from white nationalists, among other hate-filled groups.
But some Republicans are pushing back.
Obviously, that's an effort to go after Republicans. It's an effort to go after conservatives. They're not seeking to make America safer. They're seeking to repress anybody that cares deeply about our Constitution, our freedoms.
Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
An American Olympic figure skater Alyssa Liu and her father Arthur Liu were allegedly tagged by secret agents of the Chinese Communist Party. The father was a political refugee who fled China in 1989 around the time of the Tiananmen Square massacre. He told the AP someone called him last year demanding his family's passport numbers, and prosecutors say this man is Matthew Zaboris, a U.S. citizen hired to spy on the family. On Wednesday, the Department of Justice accused 5 men of acting as CCP agents within the United States. The White House COVID-19 coordinator, Jeff Zients, is leaving his position. Epidemiologist Dr. Ashish Jha will replace him. Jha is the current dean of Brown University's School of Public Health. The replacement comes in the wake of the new national COVID-19 preparedness plan, ushered in earlier this month. Jha will start as the White House COVID-19 response coordinator on April 5th. He will head the U.S. government's response to the pandemic and advise President Biden. In today's statement announcing the new posting, Biden praised Jha, saying he is a leading public health expert in America.